hear something and it gives you that hope, it gives you that strength, and it might just be a line. There was a time where we were really struggling and someone sent us a podcast and it was, we can do hard things. And in my life then, that became just something that when I was in a struggle, I could say, we can do hard things. We can have a purity of heart, and God will give that to us.
Welcome to the Be Filled podcast. Together, we will explore the deepest desires of the human heart and how our Creator wants to fulfill your every longing. Join us as we explore the beautiful teaching of St. Pope John Paul II on the theology of the body. We are so excited you're here on the journey with us. Open your heart to be filled. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Be Filled podcast. My name is Rochelle Parker, and I'm here with my friends Katie Davis and Patty Strauss, and Sister is unable to be here today, unfortunately, so we're really going to miss her this episode. But today we're just going to continue our study of John Paul II's teaching on the theology of the body. Today is really just a review of chapter 2 of part 1, which is entitled Christ Appeals to the Human Heart. And we'll be looking at a section entitled The Gospel of Purity of Heart, Yesterday and Today. And so that's found in audiences 58 and 59. And so I always appreciate these reviews. John Paul II just is able to put it all together so beautifully. And I think that's such a great model for us as we're trying to figure out how to express that to other people. So I'm excited to take a look at it and see what comes out for each of us. So audience 58 is entitled Theology of the Body. That's a good title, isn't it? And here again, he's going to take us through a brief overview of what he's analyzed so far. And he's going to begin with why we sought to understand original man in the beginning, right? The man of original innocence. And he writes that we wanted to understand the truth about man's vocation springing from being made as the image of God, male and female. And he reminds us that this is really essential to understand this truth in order to understand Christ's response to the Pharisees. If you remember way back when, in the very beginning of this chapter, the Pharisees were questioning Jesus about marriage and how he responds to them by going back to the beginning. So John Paul II is reminding us of why we did that. And then he goes on to remind us that our study of historical man, or the condition of man after original sin, us, right? That was really aimed at understanding Jesus's words regarding adultery in the heart, and what that meant for the people listening at the time and also for us today. And then he sums up how Jesus's words point us to purity of heart and what it means to live life according to the Spirit, which is what we talked about the last 2 episodes. He reminds us that the man who opens himself to the work of the Spirit is able by God's grace to obtain purity of heart and to rise above concupiscence. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts today. Patty, would you like to share first?
Well, I always read the sections and then I kind of sit with them, and I used to just, like you said, John Paul II has a very good way of summarizing everything, but it still seems really big to me when I look at it. So I just kind of sit with it, and I thought it was kind of interesting that this quote from St. Josemaria Escriva came across my path, and it says, "When you decide to lead a clean life, chastity will not be a burden on you. It will be a crown of triumph." And when I looked up a little bit more about this Saint Josemaria, he's known to be a saint who is known for helping all people obtain sanctity in their ordinary lives and their ordinary work. And I thought that was almost a summary of a summary, because in a sense, I think what came to me in this chapter is that these teachings, John Paul II goes over Christ's teachings. He said, these are normative. And you had mentioned that, these are for all times. This is what Jesus was saying at the time when he was walking on the earth, but they're for our time and across all cultures. And I thought that was very powerful for me, because when you look around our society, many seem to struggle with chastity and purity of heart. We know that pornography is at an all-time high the youth, because of the different ways medias are presented, our youth are struggling with staying innocent. So there's all of that. So to me, recognizing that it is with Christ's grace, with God's grace, that we can, this is normative. God gives us this, and that we can obtain it. So we must man must open himself up to the life of the Spirit in order to share in an evangelical purity of heart. Again, it's just constant. John Paul II, through this long section, we said it's probably the longest section, he goes over and over with a fine-tooth comb to encourage us that we can, through the help of God, obtain this purity of heart in order to find again and realize the value of the body freed by redemption from the bonds of concupiscence. So back when I've been married 35 years, so there's definitely different times in our family life that we have ups and downs, strengths and weaknesses. And I wanted to point this out kind of strongly, because sometimes you'll hear something and it gives you that hope, it gives you that strength, and it might just be a line. There was a time where we were really struggling, and someone sent us a podcast, and it was, we can do hard things. And in my life then, that became just something that when I was in a struggle, I could say, we can do hard things, and I would say it out loud, and I'd find that our body language just that stronger. We can do hard things. Yeah. So I just want to say we can have a purity of heart, and God will give that to us. So the goal is God, and we just have to really try to keep a consistent prayer life, and God will continue to pour into us.
We need to have a code word. Every time I'm struggling, I just call you and you say, you can do hard things.
Yes, I love it.
It's powerful.
Because I thought this audience was super hopeful as well. Yeah. And I love that he ended on this note, because I feel like it's really easy to fall into despair.
Yeah.
And to be like, well, Adam and Eve messed it up, and so we were born with this concupiscence, so we're going to be fighting it our entire life. I mean, you can quickly just go downhill. Yes. Right. And I think what the message is saying, like, no, this is realistic for you. Yes. Like, he is not trying to get us back to, like, pre-fall, original innocence. He's trying to give us a path forward. Exactly. Right? And so we're never going to be pre-fall. But we also have this path that we can take to sanctity, like your quote. And so, I think we just have to avoid those terms of like, well, this is just who I am, or I'm always going to struggle with this, because those are words from the devil. Those are words of despair. The devil wants you to believe that, no, you can't do hard things. This is too hard. You were born, with this, and so you're never going to overcome it. Like, those are the things we have to call out, right? Yes. And the good news is that, like, especially when we are, like, married, we have a partner to help us with this self-mastery.
Thank goodness.
And so, you could look at it as two ways. Like, you have a constant temptation or you have a partner to help you over it. And I don't know if you guys have always, have ever, like, gone on a diet or tried to give something up and your partner didn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I gave up dairy for 30 days. And I looked at Brent and I was like, look, you have to do this with me, because if you eat cheese, which is like what I love, I was like, if you eat queso and pizza and ice cream every night, I'm never going to do it. And so, like, us doing it together helped us, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would have never been able to do it. I'm on day 29. Okay, I don't know what's going to happen when I eat that first bowl of ice cream.
Oh, wow, right. That could be interesting.
But we did it together. And so,
awesome.
Like, we knew it was kind of a form of self-mastery, right? Like, we could do it together. We could support each other. So I really think it helps to have, like, a support system.
Oh, 100%.
And it also just helps to know that it is possible. Like, I researched it, and there were people that had no dairy for longer than 30 days, right?
It can be done.
Good for the research.
So you have to just remember, that hope comes from knowing who we are and how we were made, and then that leads to a more perfect discovery of the dignity, in this case, of our bodies. Okay, and so really what he's talking about is that spousal meaning. And on page 278 of the commentary, Christopher West says, This is the body's great dignity. It incarnates God's mystery, which is love. Man's vocation is to love as God loves, and it is revealed through the spousal meaning of his body. And so after I read that, like you said, Patty, I kind of have to sit with it for a little bit, but I couldn't stop thinking about the term to make love. And really, when you think about it, you can make love in two different ways that look exactly the same on the outside. And they reflect like life according to the flesh and life according to the spirit. And that's what makes them different on the inside. And so, like man and woman were made in God's image. They have a spousal meaning to their bodies. Their bodies are different yet complementary, right? And so, if God is love and he invites man and woman to make love, he's inviting them to make more of himself, right? And then the opposite is also true. So when a man and woman do the act of making love, but they don't actually do it with a purity of heart, they do it the opposite of love, right? The same act has a completely different meaning because the opposite of love isn't hate, it's use. And so that's exactly what happens when a man and a woman do not love each other totally, faithfully, fruitfully. Those are the marriage vows you make if you got married in a Catholic church. And so they use each other instead of making love. And so I really, go back to that thesis statement, kind of wrap this whole section up, is man finds himself through a sincere gift to himself. Therefore, he can never find himself through use. Right?
Right. That's exactly it.
So,
yeah.
That's all I got.
Wow. Well, that
was good. That
fabulous.
Was
I have so many songs right through my head. Anyway, I'm not going to start singing those songs, but I loved, both of your reflections were so great. And I think, the main feeling I felt after this audience was just joy, pure joy. How amazing that it is possible to attain purity of heart on this side of the fall. And there were a couple of quotes that really stuck out to me. One was John Paul II writes, "It is the purity of the man of concupiscence." First of all, just purity of a man of concupiscence. That is amazing that's real. But he says, "Who is nevertheless inspired by the word of the gospel and open to life according to the Spirit. That is the purity of the man of concupiscence who is completely enveloped by the redemption of the body achieved by Christ." Oh, I just love that word, those words, completely enveloped. We just let it be done. Let it be done to me, right? That is life according to the Spirit, opening yourself to him. Wow, that just popped in my head, the whole fiat thing. That just came into my head right now. But to be enveloped by what Christ has already done for us. That's all we're called to do, right?
Yeah.
And then another piece that I really loved, what is all this for, right? Why do we want purity of heart? What is the goal of self-mastery? And so he writes later, "The satisfaction of the passions is, in fact, one thing. Quite another is the joy a person finds in possessing himself more fully, since in this way he can also become more fully a true gift for another person." And I was just reflecting kind of on my own experience, of trying to satisfy myself all the time. I mean, it's easy to do that, to give in all the time to whatever you think is going to satisfy your heart, whatever that looks like. That's an easy thing to do, but it did not lead to happiness.
Right.
It led to a brief moment maybe of kind of numbing out or, not really feeling deeply whatever I might have been going through, but then followed by shame, remorse, feeling much worse for sure. It definitely did not lead to joy. And I know that for me, until I was able to start letting go of all those attachments and addictions and just chasing after what I wanted, that I was able to discover my true self and to be a gift to another person. I do not do it perfectly, I'll have you know, but I have absolutely experienced that progressive, healing,
It's very powerful.
over time, which is, it's awesome. And like the deeper you go, the more you desire it, and the more you want that in your life. So I'm just so grateful for the journey of recovery and the redemption, that Christ offers. It's such a gift. So thank you guys for your beautiful reflections. So good. Okay, so then we have audience 59, which is entitled Theology and Pedagogy. Is it pedagogy?
Pedagogy.
Oh, good. I'm really glad because I practiced and it's been a while since I've had a tough word on the podcast. So pedagogy. That's not easy. Okay. So what is pedagogy, you ask? I hear you. So did I. So basically it's a method and practice of teaching or a way of educating, really. So understanding our bodies, male and female, as a sign of interpersonal communion in which man realizes himself through the authentic gift of self will then help us understand how we are to live, right? Like if we know who we are, then we know how we are to live, which is what we said, I think, in the very beginning of this whole podcast. So, but understanding ourselves on a theological level is what it's going to help answer questions that can't be answered with just a biological understanding of the body. That's where John Paul II goes in this section. And he says, here we touch problems that often need fundamental solutions, which are impossible without an integral vision of man, right? He goes on to share that this study we've undertaken so far has no other goal than the appreciation of the dignity of marriage and the family. And he says that in order to understand the teachings of the church, we have to understand the teachings of Christ, right? So he mentions a couple documents of the church. He mentions Humanae Vitae and the incredible benefits of natural family planning for marriage. And he writes that the goals of the pedagogy of the body lies in ensuring that the marital embrace conforms to the moral order, or in the end, to the dignity of persons. That's what all the church teachings are about regarding marriage and the family. So I'm excited to hear all of your thoughts. Katie, would you like to start?
Well, I'm just going to really laser in and focus on Humanae Vitae, because I just really think that since it was referenced in this section and it really just stuck out to me, I kind of refreshed my memory a little bit on kind of where it was compared to Theology of the Body. So just a little bit of background on it. It came out in 1968, and really it was just the church clarifying it opposes the use of contraception, and it upholds the value and dignity of marriage and the family. So it came 11 years before Theology of the Body. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of how I view it is, and there was a little excerpt in there so you can see how like dense the language was in it, but it was the rule. I mean, it says a little bit of the why, but it was a really small document. Nothing compared to this giant Theology of the Body, right? And so then 11 years later, it's almost like we had to kind of like wrestle with the rule, and you know, everyone else, it got lots of pushback because pretty much all the other Christian religions were kind of saying, no, contraception is the responsible thing to do. So I almost think it had to simmer a little bit, you know, and let kind of everything fall. And then Theology of the Body came 11 years later, and it kind of explained the why. It explained the heart behind Humanae Vitae. And so one of the beautiful quotes that I thought, Pope Paul VI wrote Humanae Vitae, and on page 363, it's quoted, it is also to be feared that the man growing used to the use of contraceptive practices may finally lose reverence for woman and may come to the point of considering her as a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment and no longer as his respected and beloved companion. Wow. Like when I read that, I was like, what a powerful response when a friend says, yeah, we're done having kids. We went ahead and got a vasectomy. Like how much is being lost from it? And did they know how much is being lost from it? And, when you use contraception or you do something that permanently sterilizes your marital union, you're basically saying out loud or to yourself in your marriage, I don't trust God. Like, I don't trust his plan for me and my family. I need to take control of the situation. And then you're also saying, I don't trust myself and I don't trust my husband in our ability to control our desires. And so you pretty much take your opportunity to do hard things or your opportunity for self-mastery and you say, this sounds too hard. We're not even going to be tempted by this. And so I wanted to bring up this book. I've mentioned it before. It's called The Good News About Sex and Marriage. It's by Christopher West, but it's basically a bunch of question and answers. And so it's just like a quick reference of probably the most common questions that Christopher West gets as he's teaching theology of the body, and then like a very quick answer. And then we know that there's this huge theology behind it that has the deeper meaning. But one of the questions in it, it's the questions on the bottom of page 103. It says, what's the big difference between sterilizing the act of your intercourse yourself and just waiting until you're naturally infertile? The end result is the same thing. Both couples avoid children. And so his answer is so beautiful. And even though I forget sometimes how to properly explain it, I think that he does a great job. So I just wanted to share this answer because I do think we have to continually practice kind of reminding ourselves of these so that for ourselves when things get hard, but then also so we can share it with other people. And so when he's answering the question, like, what's the big difference if you use contraception or you just abstain during your fertile time? You're both avoiding children, so why would one be a sin and one not? And he says, his answer is, so what's the big difference between killing grandma and just waiting for her to die naturally? The end result is the same thing, dead grandma. And then he says, yes, the end result is the same, but one is a serious sin called murder, while the other, there's no sin involved whatsoever because grandma's death is an act of God. And then here's the key. He says, if you can tell the difference between euthanasia and natural death, you can tell the difference between contraception and natural family planning. In natural death and natural family planning, God remains God. In euthanasia and contraception, we take the power of life into our own hands and we make ourselves God. Ugh. And we can apply that to so many different things of like where we try to be God and we don't let God be God. And I think it's confusing because we're supposed to image God. We were made in the image of God and we do things to be an image of God, but it's very different when you say, no, I don't trust God. I need to be God. And when you really think about it and you go back to the original sin, that's what happened, right?
Yes.
Yep. So the devil said to Eve, just eat this and you will be like the gods.
Right.
And that's what made her disobey. She wanted to be God. And so I just couldn't help but think about the parallel and how similar it was. It's our need to be in control. Mm-hmm. It's our need to thus be God. This is what we're doing when we use contraception. We're not trusting that God knows what to do. And we're taking all of his place and taking matters into our own hands. And it's almost like we know better than the most wonderful and powerful creator.
Yeah.
So like, would you ever go over to your friend's house who is a world-renowned artist, take one of her original paintings off the wall, take a Sharpie out of your back pocket and go, I think this needs a little more over here, and then put it back on the wall? No. So that's what we're doing to our bodies. Like, they are beautifully and perfectly made, even though we can point out a lot of things we don't like about them. And so instead of like trying to play God and changing our bodies, sometimes permanently, have we ever thought about just leaning into it, right? And just thinking about maybe it's supposed to be hard. Maybe I'm supposed to get a grace from this being hard. And so, yeah, I think there's so much more, and I know we'll get into it down the road, but I might have gone down a rabbit hole.
No.
Take us back, Patty.
No, I'm gonna just keep on going.
Okay.
Actually, it's really perfect. It goes really hand in hand with my reflection and going back to section 58, where we were talking about this is normative. This is what God asks of us. So, and then when I heard you speaking, it's more talking about how do we build virtue, which is, like we talked about in the last podcast, making ourselves resemble more our Lord with sanctifying grace, as opposed to practicing vice, because it's actually a grave matter to take and do our will and not God's will. And so what happens, so being an NFP teacher now for almost 30 years, I've seen this played out when John and I first started to teach, and we had these teachings before us. And it was before I really started to understand theology of the body. That was, again, I've mentioned that before, teaching NFP and having that presented to us helped us with this language, this understanding of this deeper purity, the movement of the heart. So so when John and I first started to teach, the couples would come, engaged couples, maybe they'd already been married, but for whatever reason, they're coming to take our class. And what we would say, well, sorry, we felt we need to apologize. There's abstinence involved. But then as we grew in our marriage and we came to understand the teachings more, we came later to more of, actually, we want to tell you about this gift that's within natural family planning, and it is called abstinence. And because what happens when you're not blocking God's grace, truly, and there's different things that go on, natural family planning. One of my favorite, there's many studies on its effectiveness. My favorite one to quote is Mother Teresa. It was done in 1994. It was, I can't remember the name of the journal, but one of the big journals of gynecological studies. And Mother Teresa did a study with nearly 59,000 women in Calcutta, India. Most of those women were not college educated. Most of them were illiterate. They used the seasons. There's different forms of natural family planning, but they used a very simple method of using the seasons to teach when a woman is fertile and when they're not fertile. And I just have to say that of their study with nearly 59,000 pretty well-motivated women, but not college-educated, there was a 99.8% effectiveness rate. And meaning that they could space and limit their children by following their fertility. And by knowing that they're not contracepting, they're merely respecting that when they're fertile, they're abstaining. And when they're fertile, they're using that time for the bonding and their bonding. And so, so it was through these kind of teachings. So it can be done. We can do hard things, but what happens when we come up to that fertile time? That's kind of what we read and hear, that the graces are there and what we learn. You mentioned that. What do we learn about ourselves when we do things God's way? And so through the studies that show that people that practice natural family planning, there's a much less divorce rate, because there's this respect that happens between couples when they understand we're mutually fertile together, and we're going to make this decision together about when God's calling us to be open to life. And so we tell this story too. So there's a fertile time in each cycle. And the couple look at each other and they're like, now is not the time. And that's kind of their sacred time. They love each other and hold each other. They don't avoid each other. They don't use each other. And then at some point, God will call them to extend their family. And they see that time of fertility now as a sacred time. Now God is part of it in a way that's elevated more than any other. And they recognize that now we are co-creating with God, to the point where even if a child is lost in miscarriage, they know, very much aware, that there is an immortal life that was created. So it's a whole different thing. Conversely, we get people that come to our class that are coming off of birth control, and their common language to us is, we've felt used, we felt not seen, not heard. And so the language between a couple that's practicing natural family planning, though there are the difficult times of abstinence, it's how we look at it. It's how we believe we can have a purity of heart. It's how we believe what God has taught us about this very sacred relations that we have. So That kind of went off script. But it's all in there. It really it came from what I was hearing from you, that by following God's way, it can be difficult, but we then grow in virtue and we grow closer to our Lord. And we all know with Lent coming up, we all know that we will take on hard things and it will transform us, that God will transform us. So it's just that kind of a thing. You're going to have to sum it up.
I don't know. Honestly, wow, thank you to both of you.
Bring us back.
Don't have that much to say, honestly. I mean, I have a different, you guys know a lot more about natural family planning than I do, because of, teaching and all of that. But, and I'm just sitting here thinking about, I get really emotional about this topic, actually. And I know, I'm thinking about our listeners too. And, you may be listening and you're like, what the heck are they talking about? Because I know there are people listening who are not Catholic and have never even heard this before. You've heard us mention it here and there, but you're like, what is going on? I mean, I didn't grow up Catholic, so I didn't hear about it either until I started studying and preparing to come into the church. And I still feel like I have a lot more to learn about it, and understanding it. So just know, I guess I just want to say, if you're listening and maybe you are Catholic and this still doesn't make sense to you and you still are not sure about it, maybe you're not sure. Maybe you haven't been able to embrace this teaching of the church. I feel really emotional about this right now because I know that's real.
Yeah.
And I want you to know that I'm going to cry. Know that we love you and that God loves you. So wherever you are on the journey, you're on the journey and it's okay. You're welcome. You are welcome here. Please don't leave us. Please stay with us, because we know we're saying things that might be new to you or might seem too hard, but we can do hard things, right? That's a theme.
That's the theme for today.
That'll be a mantra for us. But I just want y'all to know that you're loved deeply, and that God, he's so merciful and he's so good, and he meets you right where you are today. And he will give you all the grace you need, and he's going to reveal things to you at just the right time when you're ready. I think that's been all of our experience in our life. We didn't just wake up and have this infused knowledge and perfectly embrace it and practice it. No. So please just know there's so much grace here. And really kind of the main, and gosh, we have so much more to go in this journey too. So much more building and trying to understand what our bodies communicate. We've spent a lot of time talking about the meaning of our bodies, the theology behind our bodies, but we're also going to really look at what are we speaking with our bodies and the way that we live, right? And so there's just a lot more to build on. So hang in there with us, please. And, I think the thing that really stuck out to me the most here is that, if we lean only on biology when we think about our bodies, then we're tempted to just see our bodies as an object, right? That we can just do with what we want. And then we're just, like you guys were saying, we're just cutting God out of the whole thing. And he made us, and he made us so well and so purposeful. So just pray with all of this and hang in there, and just know that, just ask the Holy Spirit to meet you and to make things more clear at just the right time. There's lots of resources out there. Maybe we'll try to gather. We'll try to gather up some more things. If you're ready to dive into this more now, but if you're not, that's okay, because we're just taking this a little bit at a time. But these girls, they're such a gift because their knowledge. I felt like I was sitting here with my mouth open the whole time, just listening to you guys. Tell me more, guys. But anyway, just know that we're praying for all of you. And we're going to wrap up this episode now. Our next episode, we're going to look at an appendix to the text, which is entitled The Ethos of the Body in Art and Media. So that's going to be kind of an interesting discussion about how we see the body. Like, is it possible to see the body in art and media and still value the person, right? And kind of what are the dangers there in that. So we're going to kind of look at that a little bit. But again, we just thank you so much for listening, and please pray for us, and we are praying for you. And until the next episode, God bless.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. We can be reached by email at befilledpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. There you can find additional encouragement in between episodes. Also, be sure to check out our show description for links to resources we discuss in the show, as well as questions for deeper reflection. Until the next episode, God bless.